so, it is an option, but what we did.
Let me guess, an ice box?
An ice chest, yep.
The Ready Life. Into the country.
Hello, and welcome back to the Ready Life podcast. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Nick Meisner.
And today we're going to be talking about something that we feel very passionate about, and that's helping you realize your dream of going off the grid and becoming independent for your power needs. Today we'll be looking at one of several ways that you can actually start going off the grid today. Yes, I mean today.
That's right. If you go back a few episodes, in episode number 4, we covered the topic of what is the cost of a off-grid solar power system. And if you didn't catch that one, feel free to go back to that episode on whatever platform you're listening or watching to this on, and you can find it there. Or you can go to thereadylife.com/4, and that will get you there as well. But in that episode, we looked at just a really, really rough idea of what an off-grid solar power system might cost. And I think probably a lot of you were pleasantly surprised because we've all heard massive numbers that people have paid for solar power systems. And we just wanted you to see how reasonable it could be to get into an off-grid solar power system if you are calculated and if you use strategy, which is what we are showing you how to do in this podcast and other resources and online courses and things like that. But I don't know about you, but back when we went off the grid, we didn't have a large chunk of change to throw at something like this. Even though I feel like it's pretty reasonably priced, if you do it right, even still, it does take the upfront expense for the equipment. And a lot of us don't have money like that sitting around. And so what we wanted to do in this episode is to discuss with you a strategy of how you can start this process and kind of spread it out. Because one of the things that I think of is the easiest way to buy a big ticket item when you're short on cash is to make payments. Now, personally, we are kind of allergic to payments. We don't like the whole debt thing. We don't like payments and all of that. But you got to admit, it is easier to make a smaller payment each month than it is to make a great big payment right up front. But you can get the same effect of as if you were making payments on a solar power system and avoid the debt that those payments bring by breaking your complete ideal system that you'd like to end up with into smaller pieces and, basically purchasing these in stages and setting up your system in stages, one step at a time. And in doing that, you can kind of break it up into several smaller payments. This is actually what we did because, like I mentioned, we didn't have a large chunk of cash to put into a solar power system when we first went off the grid. We were strapped. We were short on cash. It was all we could do to get the land. And we actually built just the shell of a house. It was a raw piece of land. We built just the shell of the house and got it to the stage where we could move in. It was unfinished, but it would keep us warm and dry and, have the basic needs that we had. That was the position that we were in. We were stretched just to get to that point. And the last thing we could swing at that point in time was then putting money into a solar power system. So we did this by, example, just out of necessity, and we want to share with you how you can do this. Now, there's 2 basic types of scenarios that folks are going to be in when they're doing this. What would be those 2 scenarios?
Well, one scenario is one that we hear all the time is somebody emails in and they say, we live on the grid. How can we make this transition to an off-grid power system? So the first person lives in a home already, maybe they're in the country, and they want to take their home off the grid. The second person is somebody who is moving, or they just purchased some land. They live in town maybe, and they've got their property, and there is no power on the property. Or there is power close by, but they want to set up their homestead independently. So they're starting out without power. So those are the two scenarios that I can think of.
Right. And, like I said, for both, we're going to end up doing very similar things, but it's just two different ways to come at this. So first, we're going to start off with the first scenario and kind of run through this in some detail. And then I think you'll see that a lot of the pieces that we're going to talk about fit for the second scenario. So for the first scenario, this is where you are currently on the grid and you want to transition to being off the grid gradually. How can this work? So first step, the very first step that I would have you do is to have an electrician install a transfer switch on your house or on your electrical panel connected to your electrical panel. And what this transfer switch does is it enables you to power your home or certain circuits in your home's electrical system with an alternate source of power safely. You might think that you could hook up alternate sources of power to your home, just, go in and plug it in or something.
Plug a generator in.
Yeah, but it's not that simple. There are very important reasons why you need a transfer switch. And for instance, if you hook an alternate source of power up to your home and you didn't have a transfer switch, then let's say it's a blackout and you pull out a generator, hook it up to a transfer switch up to your home and power your home. Yes, it's going to power your home, but it's also going to send electricity back down those power lines and electrify those power lines. And that could electrocute somebody, especially a lineman that might be trying to work.
And the reason why the power is down in the first place.
Exactly, right. Also, when the power comes back up, it's going to fry your generator or whatever your alternate source of power is that you had hooked up. So it's going to be required by law pretty much everywhere, at least in the U.S., and it's just a common sense thing to do. You need a transfer switch. So step one of this process is transfer switch, and then get a generator if you don't already have one, and have some fuel storage on hand to power that generator.
So with the transfer switch, if it's in this position, like say if it's up, then I'm using the grid power, but then if I flip it down, it cuts ties with the grid power, and now it's sourcing the power from the generator, basically.
Right. A transfer switch is making it impossible to be hooked up to both the grid and your generator at the same time. It's one or the other, forcing you to do one or the other. And so that's why it's so important. So this is your first step. And is this ideal? By no means is it ideal.
No, but it is great to have like an emergency backup situation, because if you have at least a transfer switch and a generator installed, then the power goes down, you can switch the generator on and save things like your freezer, or you'll still have water at your home. So those are kind of essentials for life. It's two of the three basic necessities of life right there.
Right, for any of your perishable food items and things like that. So it's definitely not ideal, but it is helpful, and it's a good first step. Yes, you only have power when the generator's running. That's a disadvantage for sure. So we're not going to stop there, but this is just a first step. Now, I want to drill down a little bit more into some of the details of this. For instance, the generator. I'm really a believer in getting quality whenever you possibly can. I believe that you save money in the long run when you get quality, and the generator is no exception.
So what is that saying? Like, pay...
Buy once, cry once.
Buy once, cry once.
Yes, exactly.
And then you never cry again.
Yes, exactly. So with a generator, as far as the size of generator, I would say it's going to depend on a lot of factors here, so I can't give one answer that's going to work for everybody. But just in general, at least 6 to 8 kilowatts. That would be 6,000 to 8,000 watts of power would be a good size for a lot of folks. Now, having said that, if you have a lot of large electrical items in your house, such as electric water heater, electric forced air heating system, electric clothes dryer, electric oven and range, these kinds of things, a generator of that size is probably going to be very underpowered if you're wanting to use all of these items, especially all at once. But even if you wanted to just power your HVAC system in your house or something like that, 6 to 8 kilowatts probably isn't going to fit the bill for you. So I would suggest that you decide whether you're wanting to use this generator just to power essentials, just the important items that you really need, like water pump, fridge, freezer, these kinds of things, and some lights and stuff like that, whether you're good with that or whether you want the generator to just power your entire house just as if you were just as if the power was up where your business as usual. If you want to do that, then you're going to need to look at these large electrical loads, and it's going to take a big generator to do that kind of thing.
But if we're planning on going off the grid, then now is a good time to start thinking about your appliances in your home and maybe switching those over to something that's more energy efficient.
Right.
So when you're thinking about sizing your generator, kind of think long term too.
That's true. That's very true, because you don't really want to way oversize your generator, because the bigger it is, the more fuel it uses.
Yeah.
Even if you're not using as much power, it's a bigger engine and it takes more fuel to run. So yes, these are things to take into account, and we'll be touching on that in our question of the week, actually.
Yes, we will.
Yes. Anyhow, so that gives you an idea. Like I said, you may need more. You may need 10. You may need 15 kilowatts if you're wanting to power some big items. But for a lot of folks, especially once you end up off the grid, a lot of folks, 6 to 8 kilowatts is a good size of generator, we've found. So that would be the size. What about some brands? What do we use for a gasoline-powered generator?
So we use a good old-fashioned Honda.
Not exactly old-fashioned, but...
Good old Honda.
Yeah. And
reliable.
I've had really good success with those.
Yes.
And they run. Yes, there's cheaper generators out there for sure. But they've run pretty much flawlessly for us for many years.
And especially if you're at this stage 1, you really want something that's going to be reliable. You don't want just a cheap, run-of-the-mill generator that may or may not actually work for you when you need it most. And so... Right.
Now, we're talking about gasoline generators because that's the most common type of generator out there. But you should be aware of some pros and cons with gasoline generators. For instance, you've got to haul fuel in for you got to haul gasoline in. Also, gasoline can go bad pretty quickly if you don't stabilize it. So you're definitely going to want to stabilize any of the fuel that you use in your gasoline generator. And I'm just going to tell you a quick tip here, pro tip. The best stabilizer I've ever found is for gasoline. It's PRIG, as in gasoline. It's PRI dash and then the letter G for gasoline. And that stuff is used commercially, and we've used it for decades. And we actually have stored gasoline with PRIG on board for, it was either 6 or 7 years in hot, humid conditions, which are the worst.
Yeah.
And it ran just fine in the car after all that. So I'm pretty impressed with the stuff and highly recommend it. So, but this is a factor to take into account because gasoline is not the only fuel type out there, is it?
No. Actually, you can do a diesel generator or a propane generator.
That's true. So let's talk a little bit about each of those. With a propane generator, one of the big advantages is your fuel never goes bad.
Yeah.
propane lasts indefinitely. So that's definitely a big advantage. Also, you're not having to haul fuel in 5-gallon containers or 55-gallon drums or whatever. The delivery company comes out and fills up your 500-gallon or 1,000-gallon tank.
Yep.
And it runs off of that. So that can be really convenient. A lot of nice advantages to propane generators. And as far as brands, there's numerous brands out there, but Onan, Kohler, even Generac makes some decent propane generators. So those are options for propane. And one other thing I should mention, just sorry to skip back here to the gasoline side of things, but if you are going with something, we mentioned Honda, and there's a lot of generators out there that are kind of, I'm not sure how to describe them, but mixed brand, where some company will buy a Honda engine and stick it into their generator, and only the engine is Honda. The whole rest of it is some aftermarket, who knows what, the electrical parts that, the generator part that generates the electricity and the voltage regulator and all these things. I would caution you about those kinds of setups. And the same would go with propane, but this is more common with a gasoline generator, that I would caution you about those, because some of those can be really cheap, and they just stick a Honda engine in there because then they've got the branding of Honda. And you think, oh, this is great, but the electrical parts are not Honda. So just be aware of this. And bad things can happen when you use a cheap generator. If the electrical parts on board, the electronics on board are not good quality, you can have voltage spikes and things like this happening, and it can mess up appliances or electronics in your house. I've heard of it happening. So just go quality if you can. Same with gas or with propane, and really as far as diesel too.
Yeah. Again, back to the buy once, cry once.
Right. Exactly.
I know that's one thing we've learned is every time we've bought cheap, we've always regretted it. But when we took the time or the extra money and spent for something that was really good quality, we've never regretted it.
That's right. So moving on to diesel. With diesel, it's got the potential to be the longest lasting type of engine. So if you're going to be running it a lot, then diesel may be the best option for you. However, it does still have some drawbacks, like you have to haul fuel, and your fuel can go bad. Diesel can go bad, just like gasoline can. I think diesel is a little bit less volatile than gasoline as far as stability, so it may not go bad as quickly, but it certainly can. And once again, I'm going to recommend a stabilizer for diesel. It's PRI-D, similar to, I mentioned PRI-G. That's for gasoline. PRI-D is for diesel. And we'll have a link to both of these in the show notes. If you go to thereadylife.com/10, the number 10. But anyhow, you're going to have to stabilize your fuel. But with a diesel generator, they last and last and last. I mean, you can get tens of thousands of hours out of these things. And they are noisy, yes, and they're heavy. You're not going to just pick that thing up like you would a small gasoline generator or something like that. It's heavy. It's a chunk of steel. But if you're going to be running it a lot, then it could be a great option. They're typically a little more fuel efficient than a gasoline generator, and advantages like that just last a long time. Some good brands are Kubota, Isuzu, Onan. There's others out there as well, but those are some good options for a diesel generator as well. But anyhow, so that's a little bit about generators. Once again, you want to have a transfer switch put in, and as a general rule, it's going to need to be an electrician that puts it in. There are some transfer switches out there that you may be able to wire in yourself if you're handy, and you could wire them into just certain circuits on your panel where it will only transfer those particular circuits over to the generator. And that would be the way to go if you were going to just, if you had some other big loads, like HVAC system and electric oven and range and clothes dryer and stuff like that, and you wanted to just power the essentials with your generator, then you could use one of those transfer switches that just does certain circuits. But you may want to do a transfer switch on the whole house, or even a sub panel, which is basically a smaller breaker box that will feed only the loads that you want to be powered with the generator when that time comes. So there's a number of options. You can talk to your electrician about that. They're super familiar with this. Lots and lots of people have transfer switches, so they should be able to get you all set up with that. And so anyhow, as far as the generator, though, you want to keep it out of the elements, don't you?
Yeah, so you need to build a generator shed or have it somewhere where the exhaust can go outside. So you don't want to do it in your garage.
Absolutely.
But
there have been many people
Yes.
that have died of carbon monoxide poisoning by running a generator inside their garage or something like that. Maybe they left the door open a little bit, or the door blew closed and they weren't watching, or any number of things can happen. And please don't try it. Your generator needs to either be running in under an open air roof, or needs to have plenty of ventilation, exhaust vented outside, that type of thing. So be careful with that. But you do want to keep the generator out of the elements. You don't want it sitting out there in the rain and snow and that sort of thing.
yes, for sure. So
And-
generator shed is a must.
Right. Do we want to one of the things that folks will often do, though, is they'll buy a generator and they think, I'm good.
We're good.
Got my 10 gallons of gas there, got my generator, and I'm good. And 5 years later, they have a blackout and they pull out the generator
And
and
it
they
doesn't
wonder, why can't I get this thing to start? For one thing, if it's battery started, or if it has an electric starter on it, they probably couldn't even get the thing to turn over because the battery's probably dead on it.
Yep.
And even if they did get it to turn over, if it was a gas or diesel generator, the fuel has almost certainly gone bad. And, all kinds of things can happen when you let equipment sit for a long time. So definitely exercise your generator at least once a month or every other month, something like that. That's a good rule of thumb, to exercise it. Keep your fuel rotated. Even if you stabilize it, it's a good idea to rotate it. And just your regular maintenance, keeping the oil changed, things like this are going to be really important if you want that generator to be there for you when you need it. So, pros and cons with this particular stage. The pros would be, of course, you can have power during a short-term blackout. That's great. That's a step up from where you're at right now, I'll bet.
But some of the cons is that if you have just a generator and a transfer switch, you only have power when the generator is actually running. So this is just a very short-term,
Temporary,
measure.
right? Also, as far as cons, how much fuel do you have? And how long is it going to take you for? Because if you're having to run that generator all the time to keep your fridge and freezer going and things like this, then that 10 gallons of gas that you had sitting there, you'd be surprised how quickly you can blow through it. So do you have enough fuel on hand to take you for a while? And, this is a disadvantage to this stage. What if the generator doesn't work?
It's noisy.
It's noisy, yes, indeed. And it's expensive to run a generator continuously, burns a lot of fuel, puts a lot of wear and tear on the engine. And so it's not for long-term use. This is only for short-term. So
Step one, transfer switch and a generator.
Exactly. So step 2 is we are going to now add a battery bank and an inverter, power center. The main pieces of equipment here are battery bank and an inverter. Now, if you're wondering what is an inverter and all of this, you might want to take a gander back to one of the previous episodes on solar power systems that we've done on the Ready Life podcast. And you can find out a lot there about all of this kind of equipment, but just very quickly, an inverter is taking the power from the DC power from a battery bank and converting it into regular AC household current that you use in your house so that you can run your refrigerator and turn your lights on and run your water pump and all this kind of stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a bank of batteries. We're going to hook up a inverter to that bank of batteries, an inverter charger, where it's going to do the conversion both directions. It's going to take AC power from your generator, convert it into DC so you can charge your batteries up, and then when you need it in your house, it's going to take DC power from the batteries, convert it back into AC so you can use it in your house. And what this is going to enable you to do is to run the generator just for a little while, just for several hours, to charge the batteries up, and then you can power your house, or more likely certain circuits on your house, for perhaps a few days. Just depends on the size of your battery bank. But if you size it appropriately, then you should be able to run for, plus or minus 3 days on just your battery power, which means you're only running your generator for several hours, and then you've got 3 days of power that's 24/7. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, in this step, you get to do something very beautiful called turning the generator off.
Yes, indeed.
And then you can run on the battery power for several days.
That's right. So this is definitely a big step forward. It's not where we want to end up because you still are reliant upon
The
that
generator.
fuel-powered generator, but we're running it a whole lot less, and that 10 gallons of gas that you had is going to last you a lot longer now. And it's not going to be as noisy and all these kinds of things. So definitely a step up. And this little system that you've built can be run straight into that transfer switch that we were using for the generator. And so now the generator is going to be tapping into your inverter charger instead of being hooked up to the transfer switch. And the only thing that's going to hook up to the transfer switch is the output from your inverter charger. Everything's going to be running through your little off-grid system because now you have a bona fide off-grid power system.
Congratulations.
Yes.
Yay.
It's not a renewable system. It's not a solar system or whatever, but it is a off-grid power system. So just a few details here. What size of inverter charger is a good size? Like I said, for the generator, there's a lot of factors here. I can't tell you because it depends upon how efficient your home is and things like that. We talk a lot about efficiency. We're going to be going more and more in this podcast with you about how to become more energy efficient without changing your lifestyle and things like that. But assuming that you have a efficient home and that you're preparing to go off the grid, we find that for efficient homes, 4 kilowatt plus or minus inverter chargers seem to work pretty well. If you aren't pretty efficient, then you can stack multiple inverters to get 8,000 watts or more, or you can even buy larger inverter chargers. They're making them these days 8 kilowatts, even more, that in one generator. In one inverter, sorry. And these inverter chargers, many of them can produce either 120 volts or 240 volts. Now, if you don't know what that means, that's okay. Don't worry about it. That just means that your inverter charger is going to be able to power your water pump and your well and things like this. So that's a little bit about size, not very scientific. When we talk about designing systems in the future, we'll get into more detail there, but this just gives you an idea of what's typical. And I'm seeing systems getting bigger and bigger these days. So yes, you've got some folks that stack multiple inverters on top of each other. When I say stack, they're basically connecting them together where they have multiple times the output. And you can totally do that, but we don't really touch on those kinds of systems a whole lot here because what we're really trying to do is help you to be able to do this on a budget. And that's what we had to do. And that's what we're trying to help you to do, is to think smart and to use strategy than to just throw money at this. So if you want to just throw money at this, then, this may not be the right strategy for you. But that's what this is about. So that's a little bit about the size of the inverter. What about some brands?
Well, we have Magnum
That's
for
right.
ours. Outback is one that your folks have. And Schneider, I think, is the other brand.
Yep.
That's really common for good inverters.
Those
good
are the
quality.
three.
Yeah.
There's more.
There are a lot more out there, but these three are the three brands that we really trust. They're good quality. They've been reliable. So, yeah.
Right. The market has been flooded lately, the last few years, with lots of inverters from China and all over the place. And I don't know what to tell you about all of them. You know, you don't know until you've used them for a few years. So these are brands that have been around for decades, and they make equipment that's made for powering your house. This isn't just for some little emergency backup. These aren't gadgets. These are built for people who live off the grid. So that's why I like these. So what are some of the pros to this? I think we've already alluded to a lot of these. But
yeah, so pros would be much less generator runtime, less fuel. You're not plowing through quite as much fuel. There's less wear and tear on your generator, so your generator is going to last you longer once you get to this stage. And did I mention the noise? You're not running the generator all the time, so you don't have that crazy generator noise going on in the background. So
that's right.
Yeah.
But as far as cons, the major con I can think of is that you're still dependent on the generator and fuel and things like that. This isn't a renewable system, but we're still on stepping stones. And this is much better than step one was.
And the nice thing is that all this equipment that you've been, slowly getting in each stage, it's building the foundation for your power system in the end. So it's not like you're going to have to buy some equipment and then say, well, okay, in step 2, we get rid of this equipment and we get new equipment. This is all equipment that you're going to still use in your power system once you have it fully set up and renewable.
So you're not wasting any money.
Exactly.
If you do this right, and here's the thing, when we're saying use strategy to set up a quality system on a budget, is you've got to design your system ahead of time, if at all possible, because then if you have done that, then you know which equipment you're going to need. And you can, when you're at stage 2, you'll know what size of inverter charger you need or what size of battery bank you might need, that sort of thing. And yes, these are things that could be altered later on, but anyhow, it's nice if we can get it set up the way that it needs to be so that you're not having to redo stuff later on.
Yes.
And that comes from design. And that takes us to step number 3, which is potentially the final step in this process. So remember, we started out with just a generator and a transfer switch and some fuel storage. And then when we were able to, we added batteries and an inverter charger and, a few other little lesser pieces of equipment, breaker panels and things like this. But that enabled us to get more independent. And now we get to step 3, which is where we add in some renewable sources of charging. Solar is going to be the most common. That's what most people use. It's easy. It's maintenance free for the most part. I mean, there's basically no maintenance, no moving parts. Everybody's got some amount of sun. Yes, some people have more than others, but everybody has some. With the other types of renewable energy, it's not as consistent as the sun. Like wind, it's more variable. A lot of locations are just no good for wind power. And unless you have a pretty awesome creek on your property that has the right amount of flow and fall on it, then hydro is not going to be an option for you, hydropower. So solar is the common one.
So at this stage now you can look around at your property and figure out what resources you have to create or generate energy besides just your generator. Especially sources like he mentioned that are renewable. Like if you have a creek, that's awesome. You'll have power coming out your ears. I know some people who do have hydroelectric systems set up, and it's wonderful. We don't have that luxury, and a lot of people like Nick said don't, but solar is a really great option for most of us. And like you said, wind is, it's a hit or miss with wind. But
Right. And, I'm sure we'll be talking about each of these more. But the point is, this is the stage where you're going to be getting your system where it's renewable. So we've already got the building blocks, already got the batteries, the inverter, all of that. We've already got a backup generator in case we have times where it's really, really cloudy and we're not getting enough sun, for the solar panels to be charging our batteries and things like that. Already got those building blocks. And so now we're just going to be plugging in renewable sources with solar panels. The additional items that you're going to need would be, it's not just the panels, you also have to have a mounting system, and you're going to need a charge controller. And the charge controller basically just keeps those solar panels from overcharging your batteries. Newer modern charge controllers also do some other fancy stuff, but at its core, that's the most basic function of a charge controller, is to keep your solar panels from overcharging your batteries. And then, of course, you've got wires and breakers and all these kinds of things. But that's the basics. So let's talk about mounts for a minute, because mounts can be surprisingly expensive.
Yeah, you can sink a lot of money into mounts real fast if you're not careful.
That's right. But there is the old adage, you get what you pay for, too.
That's true.
And in my opinion, that kind of holds true with this. So yes, probably the cheapest way to mount your panels is to stick them on the roof, like almost everybody does. Mm-hmm. And you could do that. You could totally do that. But there are some disadvantages to putting them on the roof. I don't like it. And reason being, this is especially so for those of you that are in areas that do get snow. When you get snow piling up on your roof, you can end up with the snow covering the solar panels, and you're going to get nothing until you get warm enough weather to melt your snow. Or maybe, hopefully, your roof isn't insulated very well, and so you've got lots of heat leaking out of your roof, and it'll melt your solar panels. That's a mixed blessing there. But you could end up with a very negative situation in the winter in snow country with them mounted on your roof. Also, if you have like a metal roof where the snow is wanting to slide off, it could push on those solar panels and cause some damage, things like that. So that's one reason I don't like it. Another is that very seldom is your roof the best pointed the best direction and at the right pitch. And this means that your solar panels aren't going to be producing as much power as they could, because your solar panels produce maximum power when they are pointed, perpendicular to the sun's rays, pointed right at the sun. And so this is a challenge with roof-mounted solar panels because they're typically not adjustable. It's just going to be whatever the pitch of your roof is and whatever direction it's pointed. So, you could say, well, I'm just going to oversize the system and put more solar panels on there. You could, and just throw more money at it and mount them on the roof. And you could do that if you want. But just throwing these out as cautions about mounting them on the roof. And then another thing would be, and I mentioned this, that it's not adjustable. And the position of the sun moves, especially in the northern latitudes. It moves significantly, where in the wintertime, the sun is way down there in the southern horizon. And in the summertime, it's way up. Overhead. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of variation. And so it's not probably going to be ideal for most of the year, the direction of your solar panels. And then finally, the last thing I would say is, I don't really like the idea of having to get up on my roof to do something if I needed to do something, if I needed to clear the snow off of the panels. It could be, I don't want to have to risk my life up there on the roof to anytime something has to be done. It's not that often that you got to do something, but if you needed to, I like having it down closer to the ground where you can access it better. And with a ground mount that mounts on like a pole, you can have a very nice setup where it's easy to access from the ground, and they're even adjustable. That's what we have personally, and I really like it. The downside is they can be spendy. The pole mounts for a quality pole mount, they're kind of spendy. And so, you get what you pay for, but with ours, it's really sturdy. To adjust the vertical tilt of the panels, there's just a little hand crank. I just walk over.
I can even do it.
Oh, yeah. It's super easy.
It is really easy.
So, it's up to you. There are other options. I mean, I've even seen folks build a kind of a false wall out of like 4x6s, pressure-treated 4x6s, plant them in concrete in a line and run some lumber in between them, and they could mount the solar panels to that. Or the side of your house, if you have a south-facing wall, there's some options there where you would still be able to adjust the tilt of your solar panels if you wanted to, and that could be cheaper. So there's where there's a will, there's a way. You can usually come up with something.
Some really good options. Yeah.
Depends on how much you have to put into it and that type of thing.
So now what about the charge controller?
So with the charge controller, I recommend that if your inverter manufacturer also makes charge controllers, and if it's a charge controller that would suit your needs, then I recommend sticking with the same brand, because they're going to communicate better. When you use equipment of different brands, they don't communicate. That doesn't mean that they won't work. They can certainly still work. Lots of systems out there have an inverter that's one brand and a charge controller that's another. It's just that the communication is more seamless when it's all in the same ecosystem. Right. So that would be one thing I would say. And my favorites are, you guessed it,
Magnum,
Outback, and Schneider. Those three. Once again, they all make good charge controllers. There's some other good ones out there, but I figure why not stick with the same brand as your inverter?
Yes.
And one final thing here on this step 3 is we even broke that step up into 2 stages when we first, not when we first went off the grid, but when we got to stage 3, we put in a small solar array because that's all we could swing at the time. And back in those days, solar panels were kind of spendy. They've gotten cheaper now. And so if they were as inexpensive now as they then as they are now, we might have gone ahead and put in a larger one and just been done with it. But we put in a smaller array, and then a couple years, I think it was later, we saved up and added to our solar array. And that's another option as well. So you can really break this up and take it one step at a time.
So what if you're going off the grid cold turkey? You don't have any power at your house. You're setting up a cabin out in the wilderness, and you're wanting to set up an off-grid power system. To do that in stages because you don't have the money right up front.
So with this kind of a scenario, it's going to be very similar to what we did previously. It's basically, except the main difference is that you're not having to interact with the grid. And the other thing is you don't have the grid as your backup. So with scenario number 1, where you're currently on the grid and you're transitioning off, we're good to go during stage 1 because the grid is powering your house when you're at stage 1, where it's the generator only. So that's not a problem. However, with scenario 2, where you don't have grid power there as your backup during that stage, then I would suggest that you perhaps skip step number 1, which is the generator only.
Step 2.
Go straight to step 2 if it's at all possible. Now, having said that, I'm going to confess to you, I'm going to be honest, we did start with step number 1. And so I guess I'm speaking from experience here when I say to skip that step. It can totally be done, but there's some major disadvantages because once again, you only have power when the generator's running. And what this means is that full time in your house, you only have power when that generator's running. And so for things like water in the house, you're going to want to have a really large pressure tank. If your system involves a pressure tank, then you're going to need a really large pressure tank, which is what we did. And the reason being is that enables you to run your generator, run the water pump for a little while, pump that pressure tank all the way up. And now you've got, if you have a large pressure tank, you may have
water.
30 or 40 gallons of water in that tank. And by the way, that's not a 30 or 40 gallon tank. That's actually probably an 80 gallon tank. That's how they call them. But I'm talking as far as the amount of water that it actually holds. It might be 30 or 40 gallons. And that could be enough to take you for a good chunk of the day, maybe even the whole day if you don't use much water. And that means that you don't have to be constantly
running the
generator
all the
or
time.
starting it many times a day. So that's going to be one thing that's helpful if you do find yourself in that position. Another thing, as far as keeping food cold, that's a challenge. It really is.
Yeah.
You could get a propane refrigerator. They do make those where they're completely non-electric. But long term, I would discourage you from going that direction, because once you set up with a solar system, do you really want to be having to pay for propane to power your refrigerator when you've got absolutely free solar power coming in that could power it? So, it is an option, but what we did.
Let me guess, an ice box?
An ice chest, yep. With blocks of ice, not cubed ice, but blocks of ice. And you'd be surprised if you have a really good ice chest that's really well insulated and you use blocks of ice, you'd be surprised how long those can go. I mean, you could go for a week even sometimes with that kind of a setup. So we did that for sure. For lighting, you're going to want to have, back in the day, we were using a Aladdin lamp, a kerosene lamp at night, just so that we didn't have to run the generator all the time. If all we were doing was reading, then we'd use something like that for lighting. If we were doing laundry or something like that, then we had the generator on anyway.
Yeah.
And you could do that in the evening so that it can dual purpose while the generator's running. You've also got lights in the house and things like that.
Yeah.
But that is an option. But nowadays, there's so much battery-powered stuff. You could totally get some battery-powered lights that have large batteries and use something like that in your house, or, things like that.
And then charge them up while the generator's running.
Right.
Yeah.
So, once again, this is not at all recommended, but I'm just providing these tips in case you end up in a pinch like we did, where you were completely off the grid and you can't swing buying the batteries and the inverter, but you have a generator. That's how you can make it work. But that brings us to stage number 2, which is going to be basically the same thing. Batteries, inverter, and generator. And you're going to charge the batteries up with the generator. And then you've got, 2 or 3 days of power, plus or minus, in between running the generator. But you've now got power 24/7. And then as you're able to, add solar or some other form of renewable energy to your system to charge your batteries up. And there you go. It's how we got off the grid one step at a time on a shoestring budget, truly.
Exactly. Well, that's awesome. There are other ways too that you can start working on your off-grid journey now. And we'll talk about those in future upcoming podcasts, like system design, how important it is to design a system that's tailored to you and your personal lifestyle. And then secondly was energy efficiency, which we're going to talk about that also in a future podcast. But we've finally come to the question of the week.
Question of the week is regarding refrigerators. And we actually have been mentioning refrigerators a number of times. But the question is that they said that they've...
Here, I'll go ahead and read it.
Okay, go for it.
So it says, "Hello, Nick. I really enjoy listening to your off-grid bootcamp videos. They are very helpful and informative." That's just a quick, we have a full course called Off-Grid Bootcamp that we have some students also that have sent in some questions. So we do not have a solar plus battery system yet, but I'm looking into it more this year. I have a question about refrigerators. We need a new refrigerator and possibly a freezer. We currently have 2 large chest freezers and 1 upright refrigerator freezer, side-by-side door type. I would like to replace our current fridge freezer with a 24-volt DC refrigerator only model. What do you think about buying the 24-volt DC fridge and an AC to DC converter so I can use the 120-volt AC power until we get the DC solar system? Any recommendations you have would be welcomed, such as brand, AC to DC converter, Sunfrost, Sundancer models, etc. Thank you. Signed, John.
So that's a great question, John, and I applaud you for thinking ahead and thinking about this when you're needing to replace an appliance. That's really an awesome way to do this.
Yeah.
If you see off-grid in your future, but you're not quite there yet, this is one of the best things you can be doing right now at this stage, is to be working on getting your appliances transitioned over to something that's efficient and that you're going to be happy with using off the grid. So to answer your question, as far as DC refrigerators and freezers, I should probably first say they're making the conventional AC units more efficient than they used to, for sure. So that is a possible option, that you could use a conventional AC refrigerator, freezer. If you shop around very carefully for Energy Star models and find the most efficient one you can, then you could do it. It's certainly possible to do.
We know a lot of people who have just regular fridges that they found a really good energy efficient one, and that runs just fine on their off-grid power system.
So that is a possible option. However, I will say that they still do, even the efficient AC models, they still do use a good bit more power than the super efficient DC refrigerators and freezers that are made for off-grid use. Those run straight off your batteries. That right there makes them more efficient, but they also have very efficient motors. They have super duper insulation built into them and things like this.
Yeah.
So yes, in the past, the only option out there years ago, the only option was Sunfrost. I think John mentioned Sunfrost.
Yes.
And Sunfrost is super expensive, like fabulously expensive. For their 19 cubic foot, I think it's the RF19, you're going to pay like $3,500 plus or minus. I thought Sunfrost had gone out of business, and I think they did for a little while, but I just checked and their website is online. Looks like you can still buy them. So I'm kind of surprised that they're still going, though, because they are so super expensive. They're great, and I have family that have used one for, 20 years or more, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And they are very efficient. But when that was the only DC option, I used to tell folks, just go with a conventional AC one, because you could get it cheaper, a good bit cheaper, and just take the money that you saved and put it into a bigger power system. But lately, we've been seeing some good options come on the market for DC refrigerators or freezers that are more reasonably priced.
Yeah, we actually just recently got a new fridge that's a DC fridge.
Well, let's see, how long ago was that? Year and a half ago?
Was it really that long ago?
I think so.
Oh my.
Yeah, we've had it for a while. Anyway, yeah, ours is Sundancer, which I think was another brand that
he mentioned.
John
Sundancer
mentioned.
Also.
And so that's actually what we personally have, the DC RF 450. And it's a 15 cubic foot fridge freezer on top, fridge down below, pretty conventional size. And we've been happy with ours.
Yeah, it's been very nice.
Very efficient. It's even more efficient than the Sunfrost, to be honest. And it is the cheapest of all of the upright fridge freezers that are made for DC use, at least that I'm aware of. It's the least expensive of them. It's a good brand, been around for a long time, and we've been happy with ours. Also, they make 12 24-volt, so where it will, like our model, we have a 24-volt system in our house because we're pretty efficient, and so our refrigerator will run off of either 12 or 24 volts, but they also make a 48-volt model, which is great because a lot of folks these days are setting up 48-volt systems.
Yes.
A lot of folks aren't as efficient as we are, and so they'll go with a 48-volt system. But you can expect somewhere in the range of $1,600 to $1,800, which is actually pretty on par
with what you're going to pay for a new fridge anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
In fact, I haven't checked lately, but cost of everything has been going up. I wouldn't be surprised if the conventional fridges and freezers cost even more than that.
Yeah.
So pretty reasonably priced there. The Sunstar is another option. The ST16RF would be comparable in this range of uprights that are, 15, I think that one's 16 cubic feet maybe. And it's actually supposed to be the most efficient of the three of these. It's a little more efficient than even the Sundancer, but it's a little bit more expensive in the $2,200 to $2,400 range. And they, as far as I'm aware, do not make a 48-volt model. But anyhow, that's kind of the lowdown on those three most popular ones out there.
Refrigerators, yeah.
And I think it's a great route to go now that we have these options. As far as a converter, though, because what John's looking at is he wants to go ahead and buy this DC unit, but he's still on the grid. So he's got AC power in his house. So how do you get that AC power to power your DC refrigerator? And that's using a converter. There's a number of options out there, but one option that you'll find at off-grid retailers is made by a company called IOTA, IOTA, and it's the DLS series of charger converter. And you can look at the specs for the refrigerator to see how many amps it needs and just make sure that the IOTA is able to output that amount of amps. But I think almost any of the ones that they make would be plenty sufficient for powering a refrigerator, freezer, because you got to realize these things only use about a little over 100 watts, well, plus or minus 100 watts when they're running. So they're not taking much power. And we'll have links for a lot of this stuff in the show notes page. So if you go to thereadylife.com/1010, the number 10, then that will get you to the show notes page where you can get a hold of links and all this kind of stuff. And also, we've got something, a free bonus for you, a free extra for everybody that listened to the podcast today that kind of goes along with what we were just talking about here.
Yes, we're going to give away a free ebook called What You Can Do Now to Start Going Off the Grid. So a lot of the stuff that we've talked about today is also in here our little ebook, but we also look at energy efficiency and system design, and a lot of the tips and tricks that we've learned over the years that have been really helpful. They're in this ebook that we are giving away for free. And you can find the link also to download the ebook in the show notes.
That's right. Just go to thereadylife.com/10 for the number 10. So anyhow, that's what we wanted to share with you. Really appreciate you joining us today, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time.
Yes, and please send us your questions and tell us your story. If you've already started this process, or if you're getting ready to start this process, we want to hear your story and share the joys of this journey with you. So please send us your questions at, what is the email address?
questions@thereadylife.com.
That's right. And thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next time.